Hi, my name's Gregory. I'm a director at the Restorative Lab based in the UK. We help companies to transform conflict into opportunities for growth and innovation. And a lot of our work is based on previous experience, particularly working in the sector of education. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Nottingham, and I'd like to use this opportunity to share some of my findings from my research project. I'm particularly interested in the area of participatory action research, how that relates to restorative approaches, and the methods of the theatre of the oppressed. A particular concern to me is what I observe happening in education, and that is that the more human element of it is being squeezed as we place more emphasis on assessment and standardization and tracking, not just of students but of teachers also. And I'm concerned about how young people and those that care for them in the educational setting might create more meaningful spaces for participation and the creation of knowledge. So this is the summary of me as a postgraduate researcher, looking into how drama might enhance how children and adults learn about peace and conflict in schools. It's important to note that I'm placing children as co-researchers in this project. There were a group of 12 of us who worked together for a term. And our area of interest was how we might come to better experience, know and transform conflict. It's worth saying at this point that I struggled with the concept of a researcher and a research and what a researcher looked like. So this really was a starting point for me. So the first thing that we did as a group, as part of the Peace Par research project, was an activity to define for ourselves what research meant and what a researcher looked like, because we didn't know and we were kind of expected to know. So I'm going to invite you for 30 seconds to do this activity with me. Grab a piece of paper and a pen. You're going to draw what you think of, first off, when you think of a researcher, a person who conducts research. Draw in your best or your worst drawings, stick persons or fine art, what a researcher looks like to you. Thanks for doing that. So initially, I went into postgraduate research because I wanted to understand and possibly improve the experience of a restorative encounter. I wanted to develop my restorative practice by moving away from a dependence, which I have observed happening in training situations, on the more scripted, verbal, high-end conferencing element, towards something that was much more about perception and a kind of heightened awareness that each of the participants in a restorative process seemed to be operating on. This kind of tacit communication, this leaning forward that people were doing when they wanted more information, or sitting back when they heard something they didn't agree with or yet understand. How could I better understand what the kind of the mind and body experiences were for everybody involved in that process? That's what I wanted to do. As I engaged in participatory action research and became involved with my community of researchers, they totally rejected that area of study. They weren't interested in it at all. And true to the nature of participatory action research, I had to change my research question. So what I wanted to study was kind of the intricacies of restorative practice and what was happening in those moments under the umbrella of understanding conflict. They didn't want to study that. And I'll come to the reasons why they might not have wanted to in a second. However, I do feel that using restorative practices through research, I was able to answer that question. So the moment I committed practically to a methodology, the focus of it had to completely change. And I think that this was the right thing to do, because we ended up naming the issues that we brought into the room. And ultimately exploring our relationship with the research and with each other. That resulted in some unexpected findings. To give you a bit of an overview then of where I was going with this project, it was very much defined as a qualitative piece of research that was going to be practice-led. It had arts at the centre of it, particularly the use of theatre of the oppressed activities, and the methodology, beyond just the methodology actually, I'll go on to argue that this was a philosophy as well, was participatory action research. So the research approach, it builds on Paulo Freire's processes of conscientization, through which, in this case, a marginalised group, in this case of children, participated in knowledge production, and as a result developed a heightened awareness of the forces that were affecting their lives, specifically their relationships with one another. The choice of research design and the methods, the use of theatre of the oppressed, was overtly and consciously political. So within this inquiry, knowledge was constructed as part of the vicarious experience of drama, which was made up of the face-to-face exchange through dialogic circles, image work, and improvisations. I argue that there are complementary agendas to the use of participatory action research and drama. The methodologies, both traditions are concerned with dialogue, with praxis, working with others, transformation, and the body. And drama has a really rich tradition of attention to the aesthetics of interaction and representation. And my thinking was it really had the potential to enrich the field of participatory action research, because it's basically multimodal dialogic. It's oral, visual, kinesthetic, and symbolic, and all of those modes of representation can be in conversation with one another. The Theatre of the Oppressed is a body of work developed by Augusto Boal that uses theatre as a tool for social change. And within this collection of work, it's kind of like a composite system, and you've got legislative theatre, forum theatre, image theatre, and invisible theatre, and newspaper and theatre. I really drew on experience of image theatre, and some of the more therapeutic Rainbow of Desires work filtered in here too. And Boal argues that all theatre is necessarily political, because all of the activities of humankind are political, and theatre is one of them. I started to see links between theatre of the oppressed and restorative practices quite early on. Within the theatre of the oppressed, the monologue is considered a form of oppression because it has forced one person to stop speaking. The dialogue is a way of overcoming that oppression and bringing out previously hidden and new meanings and understandings. So to engage in dialogue with somebody else is considered an anti-oppressive act. So hopefully those restorative practitioners out there will start to see the links that I made to do with this piece of research. So a key feature of participatory action research is that it's collaborative in nature, with everybody involved, engaged to conduct the inquiry. It emerges predominantly through engaging in authentic practices with the community and is much less reliant on this notion of an expert. It's situated in practice, and what I really love about participatory action research is that it doesn't involve a conscious kind of rule following, but instead enhances in the researchers the capacity to engage in a communal task in an effective way. So basically doing the best we can with what we have in the moment. And I'll argue that PAR is not just a methodology, but a philosophy. Other things that are really cool about participatory action research, it's placing the researcher as the subject. So it's as much about me being part of the process as the other researchers and the action that came out of it. It accepts the right that everybody has a right to research. It shouldn't be something that is left to academics in their ivory towers. Apodori talks about the right to research in that it's not only the production of original ideas and new knowledge, as it is normally defined in academia and other knowledge-based institutions. Research is also something simpler and deeper. It's the capacity to systematically increase the horizons of one's current knowledge in relation to some task, goal, or aspiration. So the first thing myself and the co-researchers did was ask of ourselves, what is research? This is what the young people said. So it felt like we had an understanding already of what research was, and it wasn't this specialised academic kind of knowledge that was out there. It was something that we intuitively knew how to do. So we decided to then investigate what a researcher does, what are the activities that they carried out. And this particular exercise was carried out at the start of an 8-week project and at the end of 8 weeks, so 2 months spent together, asking the young people exactly the same question. And what we can see on the left are more maybe stereotypical views of what a researcher does, the activities that they carry out. They're very scientific. They might be based in a laboratory, and they mention famous researchers such as Charles Darwin and Mary Anning as well. And at the end of our time together, spending time as participatory action research, the activities, the understandings of what researchers did change. These are the same children on the left and the right responding to the same question after 8 weeks. I think what's really interesting here is the use of the word discovery. Okay, now it's time to grab your drawing of what a researcher looked like. Again, this was something that we asked of ourselves at the start of the project. And the first thing to notice here is that there is a difference between the way the girls and the boys responded to this question. So on week 1, the boys in the group started to draw their researchers, and the common factors that they identified was that it was a man. A researcher was a man, that he had a white cloak, as they called it. They clarified for me that they meant a white coat. So he would wear a laboratory coat. And very importantly, he had mad, crazy scientist hair. So I'm interested for you to spend some time looking at your picture of a researcher and whether that compares or not. At the end of week 8, I asked the same question of the boys and the girls, but this is the boys' responses. And what's interesting here is that these pictures look very different to start off with, and they've actually started to take on more of a self-portrait. This is what these particular young boys look like. So to the girls, we'll jump straight to week 8, because they're exactly the same as they were in week 1. They were self-portraits. They were black, as the young girls were, and they were wearing their own clothes. And it seemed to be that the girls self-identified as researchers right from the start. And here's one picture that kind of sums it up. On the left was how this young person thought of themselves at the start of the project, and on the right. The only thing that's changed as she qualified for me was the mad, crazy scientist hair that you can see on the left. And now her hair is in a top knot or a bun, as she actually wore her hair in real life. So, as I engaged with this community of researchers, our understandings of what research was, what it did, who were researchers, was changing all the time. The methods that we were using, so dialogic circles, improvisation, and image work, meant that there was this constant back and forth, this conversation that was happening in terms of how we were eliciting knowledge and how we were collecting it as well. So, for example, we would create an image in response to something that was of interest to us, and then with our bodies, and then somebody else would interpret and analyze that data, and then respond to it with another image. And this could carry on and carry on and carry on until we had kind of phrases and pieces of work that were representative of what was important to us. However, this embodied investigation into how a restorative process might work, which was my initial area of interest, began to be rejected by the co-researchers. They weren't interested in that, and so of course my research agenda had to change. And the easiest way to sum up what changed for us was these changes in the research question, from mine at the top to what it became. The research had to change because we had invested time in building a community of researchers, and the reason we were a community was because we had invested time in building our relationships with each other. And the way that we built relationships with each other was to explore our values. And this was out of a desire for me to be as much of a values-led researcher as possible, and to counter what can sometimes be inferred, especially in educational research, that you stay values neutral. I would also argue that within some fields of restorative practice, that is of concern as well, that we come in completely neutral and deny or suppress the emotional and affective impact that the conversation or the looks or what is going on is actually having on us as facilitators. It can't not affect us. It's, we all have values, we have assumptions, we have life experiences, we have biases, and however much we're trying to keep neutral, we have things going in the back of our head or prickles going on our skin or at the back of our neck. We are reacting in some way to the information that's coming from other people, and we have a responsibility to acknowledge that. So as part of our research group, we spent quite a bit of time exploring our values. In a way, the exploration of values came to influence the second research question, because what happened over time was that we got into conflict with each other, our relationships broke down, and our behaviours weren't always peaceful towards one another. So we circled up and we talked about this, and we talked about what was going on. And this was quite difficult, not for us as a community, but perhaps more difficult for the other people within the school, the adults within the school, who might have felt embarrassed to have some of these issues being named, to have an external person witnessing and seeing what was going on, how these children were behaving. But it was important for me as a values-led researcher to not ignore what was happening. In fact, I felt a responsibility to name it. It was the catalyst for what accelerated the research project into something completely different. So I'm delighted that I did it. From acknowledging where we were at and the issues that we were having with each other, sometimes based on race, sometimes based on gender, sometimes based on age, only by naming that and having what Kathy Bickmore describes as somebody being able to thoughtfully name the dissonance that is happening. So in thoughtfully naming the dissonance in our relationships, only then were we able to progress our research agenda. We were stuck with our behaviours, our ways of interacting, and it's only when we said it and we talked about it that we were able to kind of move forward. So again, restorative people, you'll recognise that whole kind of breakthrough moment, of that aha moment, when what really is going on for us is said and named. Then we're able to move to the next phase of a restorative way of working. This happened within participatory action research project as well. What I hadn't expected was a kind of return to the work of the values. And I have a couple of hypotheses about this. I think that the investigation of conflict was too deficit focused. They were resisting, rejecting the fact that we were investigating something so negative. And in a way, if words could have been put in their mouth, they might have said something like, Anna, you know, we are known in this way by enough people. We are oppressed in enough ways by people in this school and by some of the people in this room. Can we come to be known some other way? Can we take control of how we want to be seen, judged, known by other people? And that isn't about how we experience conflict. It's about how we want to be recognised for our talents, our values, our appreciative qualities, or we can come to appreciate our qualities. So we would use image work and improvisation to demonstrate what we valued about one another. So they had the language of values, they had the methods of theatre of the oppressed, overarching philosophy and methodology of participatory action research. We'd been through the conflict, and we were using theatre of the oppressed and dialogic circles to kind of figure out our new way forward. So how was this particular research project restorative? I sought to respect participation by promoting particular values associated with restorative ways of working, such as collaboration, accountability, recognising confidentiality. That by being in participation with each other, we have started to create a sense of obligation towards one another as well. The teaching and learning was collaborative, in that I placed myself as much as a student teacher, with them teaching me, as the other way around. My role in the project was very much as a facilitator, collaborator and co-learner, more than a neutral expert. I brought with me a positive outlook and a belief in young people, and encouraged others, particularly the staff that I was working with, that to hold an optimistic view of young people, carrying the humanistic belief that we are all inherently good and have the potential to grow and be responsible members, not just of this research community, but of the wider school. And that mindset, going in with that and modelling that, I think helped to reduce shame and stigmatizing, and any kind of like finger pointing that might have happened, and encourage a sense of belonging and connectedness. The materials that we employed, image theatre, circles, journaling, drawing, were methods that allowed the co-research to explore multiple perspectives and learn the multiple truths about one another. Additionally, these types of methods acknowledge multiple intelligences that help with different ways of knowing. In integrated theatre, elements of mindfulness, social and emotional learning, drawing and journaling, and all of these methods were strategically included because they prioritise relationships, and they promote healing because they acknowledge that emotional, physical, and psychological and social skills are needed and necessary for success and well-being in life, basically. Members of the group have multiple opportunities to co-construct knowledge and actively participate. We identified and explored our own values and shared these with others, using our voices, our bodies, and our journals as well. And that helped us recognise that all of us are unique but not separate. And this was really key to that point where they wanted their talents recognised. That there had been a state of functioning of separateness that had led to some element of competition. And once we recognised our individual unique talents, we started to connect more. As we internalised and modelled restorative ways of being, we as a collective built the social skills needed for healthy communication. And we discovered that when things go wrong, we can circle up, discuss who was being hurt, who was affected, and what needed to change as a research group. The aim was for some form of social action rather than pure knowledge. And this action for the project took the form of community building, the promotion of dialogue, particularly amongst that group, enhanced relationships, and reduced social distance. Within the school was the amplification of marginalised voices and the promotion of justice. The philosophy of and methodologies of participatory action research and theatre of the oppressed really helped to build a sense of interconnectedness and inclusivity and displace this experienced marginalisation that they might have brought to the group prior to the research project. So a really key point here is that the outcome of the research, improved relationships, was completely dependent on the methods and the methodology. The experience of being in research influenced the outcome. The reason we could circle up and talk about the issues was because we had experience of those methods. We were comfortable with them. The methodology and methods of PAR, combined with the methods of theatre of the oppressed and using circles restoratively, meant that all kinds of skills were being fostered. So people could be listened to and have their voices and their stories heard by others. They could express their needs and their values physically or through voice or through drawing. And they could plan for action for themselves. And this could be constantly reviewed in a cyclical process as per PAR. So by being involved in these research practices, strengthened the outcomes, which is ultimately an improvement in relationships. I think there's great potential in combining restorative practices with theatre of the oppressed under the umbrella of PAR. They all are about doing with, not to, or for, or not. They put people and relationships at the centre, and there is a combined acknowledgement and a respect for people's rights the right to repair, the right to have a healthy relationship with somebody, the right to connect with others, and the right to research in the way that is meaningful to us and our group. Each of these areas separately, and I think combined as well, work well to democratise processes that might have been co-opted by more dominant groups. So we challenge the role of the researcher, the role of the actor, the role of the teacher, the role of the student, and look to flatten and democratise these roles and the processes that have been associated with those roles as well. And none of them demand specialised skills or expertise. There is an acceptance and a celebration that knowledge is within us, and it's often in our bodies and in our hearts as much as it is in our brains. And this is what PAR, Theatre of the Oppressed, and restorative practices in research really celebrate. Thank you.